The Timeshift.
Hello and welcome to The Timeshift. I'm Chris Hall, and this week I'm going to be looking at the latest edition of Class entitled Co-Owner of a Lonely Heart. And because this video is something of a review, this video is going to be spoiler heavy. So if you don't want this episode spoiled for you for whatever reason, it's best to switch the video off now. Okay, everybody ready? Everybody geared up? Let us dive headfirst into the Co-Owner of a Lonely Heart. So here we are with the fourth episode of this brand new Doctor Who spin-off series, Co-Owner of a Lonely Heart. Yeah, I saw what they did there as well, and I find it just about as entertaining. Bloody hell. But anyway, it's great to finally see this show really coming into its own and developing its own identity, because, as I said last week, this ain't your daddy's Doctor Who, this is class. It's at the cutting edge of just about everything. I mean, this week we started off with something so fresh, so original that not even the BBC as a whole has ever done something like this before. This week's episode of Class started with 4 minutes of footage taken from the recent Skyrim Special Edition. Okay, so not the greatest joke that I've ever told, but a joke nonetheless. This week saw the return of the King of the Shadowkin. Jesus, what a name. I think for short I'm just going to call him Shadow Man, or Shadows for short. Jesus Christ, when I called him Shadows then I just had a vision of me being some kind of crap YouTube personality like, well, we're going to call this guy Shadows because that's quirky and weird. Hashtag random, be sure to like, favour and subscribe us on Facebook. Woo! Anyway, this week, like I say, saw the return of the King of the Shadowkin, Shadows, Shadow Man, whatever you want to call him, and his continued attempts to reclaim his heart back from April, aka the preppy girl, also known as, at last, I know the names of at least 3 characters in this bloody show. I have to be honest with you, this week's episode, the main plot thread, the main story about April and her father, I didn't find it really as interesting as everything else that was going on around this episode. That's not to say that it was bad or the performances within it were bad. Of course, I'll talk about the performances when we get to that bit later on, but it didn't quite work for me. And the reason why it didn't work for me was because there was so much going on in this week's episode. You had so many other plot threads and storylines. You had the weird alien petal things that drink people's blood. You have Miss Quill trying to get her free will back. You have the governors and the new head teacher. The head teacher is weird because the head teacher is weird. Woo, isn't she weird and crazy? Not Michelle Gomez is sure weird in this. Woo! You have Prince Guy and these weird box of souls. You have the ethics of the Prince Guy and his slave ownership of Miss Quill. You've got the estranged father and daughter relationship again. You've got the connection of the heart of the evil Shadow Man guy and April. You've got all these different plot threads going on, and the main one, the big one we're really supposed to take interest in, the one that we're really supposed to pay attention to, kind of felt a little bit drowned out ever slightly by these bigger events that were going on around us. Again, not to say that it was any way or shape or form bad in the way it was written or the way it was performed, more that it was more from certain design choices, I guess, that made it not really work for me. This week's episode, much like last week's episode and much like the week before, is about our lead character and some kind of relationship they have with their father or father figure. This week it was about April and her estranged father. Last week it was the nerdy girl and the copy of her deceased father. And the week before that it was slightly to do with Ram and the relationship he had with his father. I suppose you could just call this show Daddy Issues rather than Class, but whatever. Improvised joke at the last minute, I won't dwell on it too far. But this week's episode, in relation to last week, the whole daddy issues kind of thing felt not as effective because of the science fiction aspect to it. So many times with moments that should be far more grounded in reality, far more emotive, just when we think, or at least I felt I was starting to get really invested in it from a character point of view, we suddenly get cut back to Shadow Man with his bulbous eyes and the wibbly-wobbly effect on him going, I must get my heart back so that I can take over that universe. Quick, wench, we must come together and fuck like never
never before, so that we can go forward and take over the universe. Whoa! Sweet mystery of life, unless I found you.
As soon as those things happen, it destroys any kind of threat that he has. Any kind of fear factor he has for next week's episode is gone now. I don't feel any kind of threat to him or what's going to happen within the universe as a whole. And this episode towards the end of it, it felt very, very Doctor Who in the worst possible way, that our big bad guy, the effect and the control that he had over our main character had no great impact to it. There is a moment where we could have got something that was a lot more gritty, something that was a lot less like we'd seen Doctor Who, with maybe April killing her father, or maybe when she did that weird thing to her mother to give her her legs back, to maybe she kills her in the process of it. You know, something that was going to be a little bit more atypical than what we'd otherwise get for it. And I'd just like to take a moment to address the whole thing with her giving her mother the ability to walk again. I have problems with that on two fronts. The first front that I have an issue with it is the fact that how did she know she was going to give her mother the ability to walk back? How did she know that that was an ability that she had? How did she know that she'd be able to cut her vortex into space and time? How did she know she could do those things? Is it some kind of psychic link to the main shadow bad guy? But if he doesn't know how to open up the tears in space-time, how the hell does she suddenly know how to do it? And the other fact of the matter is that I find it very uncomfortable. We're taking a character who should be disabled, should be in a wheelchair, and suddenly giving them the ability to walk again. I don't think out of any kind of real emotive need, but more the fact that it just makes it convenient for them when they film stuff. This is the second time now within this show where we've had a character who is disabled, or should be disabled, miraculously getting over it. In the first episode we have Ram getting his leg chopped off, but oh yeah, he's got his leg back. We're getting a robot leg. Now we have April's mother, who's in a wheelchair. Oh, she can walk again. She can walk again. I'm sorry. This entire episode, this entire show, and the way that it's structured is that effectively it's representing every kind of walk of life that there is. It's every kind of particular stereotype that you can have, from the jockey character to the arty character to the nerdy character. We've got a feminist character. We've got a gay character, but as soon as we get to a disabled character, suddenly they just seem to vanish from all sight and all sound. They have something happen to them which takes away their disability. I find that very, very odd. I'm not going to linger on it too much because that might start to get into slightly political territory, but I find it very uncomfortable to me. And I fear that it's not done because of any kind of malicious intent, but more the fact it's just been done for the sheer sake of convenience more than anything else. But anyway, I've waffled and I've wombled enough. Let us now talk about performances. Okay, let us talk about the performances, and we'll start off with the performance of the episode. The one that really deserves the credit to is the actress who plays April, insert name here. I've not had a chance to look it up. She was by far and away the best actor within this episode. She did the job perfectly fine, and it's a shame that if it weren't for those moments where we cut our way to Shadow Man, Shadow King of the Shadow King, Shadow the fucking Hedgehog, then it would have been a far, far better episode, and those moments that she had would have been infinitely better. In terms of bad performances, the only real bad performance per se comes from the actor who played her father within this, with his very realistic falling over. It made it hard to really appreciate him and his role within this show. And of course his first line within this week's show, it was kind of hard to really understand what he was saying. He just kind of sounded like this ever so slightly. Maybe he was very emotional or he had a cold, but it was kind of hard to understand what he was saying. You know the bit in this episode where the prince's boyfriend starts to look at the weird box with all the souls in it? Why was the prince so willing to show him what was going on with it and explain it to him? I mean, maybe it was another excuse for exposition from behalf of the audience, but his character feels ever so slightly suspicious to me. I mean, we never see his parents. He's got this vested interest within this strange alien box thing. Maybe he is some kind of bad guy. Oh! And again, it is a shame that the actress playing April's moments to shine were undermined by the fact that she had to share the limelight with a cartoon monster bad guy. But, you know, whatever, we'll move on now as the fireworks are getting ever so slightly louder to talk in the overview. Okay, so the overview where I talk about the episode as a whole. What do I think about the episode as a whole? Well, again, the main connection point, the main focus, the relationship between April and her estranged father, and the connection between her and the Shadow Man wasn't quite as effective as it really should have been because of the bloody Shadow Man. Because he is such a ridiculous looking bad guy that any emotive moment that's going on around his proximity is immediately devoid and destroyed by his sheer proximity to it. I think ultimately this episode needed to be its own thing. It shouldn't have been a two-part episode. This episode should have been purely about April and her father and the relationship between the two of them. Sure, you can have the moments with Shadow Man, Shadow the Hedgehog waving his arms and going, "Argh!" But you know, you just edit his involvement down in it, or take away some of the weird editing effects on him, really pare it down, make it more about April herself and the relationship with her father, really give the actor herself time to shine, and then you've got a great grade A episode, and then next week is the episode that you have the petal monsters within it, because then you've got a nice cut and a nice contrast. This week and last week were about more emotive things. Next week and maybe the week after that, if you're going to have a two-parter with the petals, can be more about science adventure, science fantasy stuff. That would be okay. Having all these kind of plot threads being set up this week with no real emotional payoff either way until next week, I kind of don't really like that much. And it wouldn't be so bad if it was a case of, oh, this week it's going to be about April and the Shadow Monster thing, and that's going to be resolved next week. Or this week it's about the petals, and next week the petals will be resolved. Instead, it's two separate storylines that really should be their own separate episodes, being cobbled together and then dragged out, which I don't like at all. I'm sure this episode was intended to be a two-parter. I don't think this is a case like we had with last year's series of Doctor Who, where certain episodes seem to be stretched out to make them two-parters, but still, as a whole entity, this week's episode wasn't bad, not as good as last week's episode, a little bit diluted by the sheer number of things going on with it, a certain degree defeated by a certain bad guy within this week's episode, but far and away better than what I expected it to be, and maybe next week we shall have a good resolution to everything that's happened. We are about midway through the series now. It's only supposed to be 8 episodes long, I believe, and here we are in episode 4. Bloody hell. And I'm finally getting the Timeshift episodes out. I mean, this will be, what, the 3rd in about 4 days or something like that? But, you know, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But what do you think? What did you think about this week's episode of Class? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know in the message section in whatever website you're watching this on, and I'll get back to you either directly or in next week's episode. Next week's episode we see more about the Shadow Man, Shadow King and the petals. Ooh! What'll happen, we'll soon find out. So until then, my friends, I say to you goodbye.